Awesome.
Yes, so hello everyone. Thank you for joining us. For those of you who don't know me, I am Helen Bello, the Director of Welcome Home to a Body, Mind, Spirit Connection here in Toronto. And Welcome Home is a new concept in experiential New Thought philosophy. It is dedicated to the global spiritual movement of embodying the timeless truth of oneness, that we are all connected through the air we breathe, the energy that we are. Welcome Home is a destination experience that is now operating online, and we do promote mindfulness, oneness, connection, health, well-being, and heart-centered communication and community. And so we have meditation classes. We have a celebration of love on Sundays with musical guests. We have special events such as this, our Conscious Cafe tonight, with Dr. Mitch Abrams. So welcome, Mitch. And Mitch is a Canadian radiologist and musician who has had this unique journey through Western healthcare as a physician, a division chief, and an open heart surgical patient. Through his knowledge and experiences, he was granted a unique and intimate perspective into our current healthcare model. As a result, Dr. Abrams has cultivated a deeper understanding of medicine and life, and he brings humor and depth and inspiration and a whole lot of heart. He shows us what we can do as individuals to foster better health outcomes for ourselves, for communities, and the world. He is the founder of Next Gen Health, and you can find his website at nextgenhealth.solutions, which continues to grow organically in connecting schools with community organizations, and particularly working with marginalized communities like our retired population through education, art-based mindfulness programs. And you're in for a treat tonight because Mitch has an incredible depth of knowledge and passion for bringing together the art of conversation, his radical art in terms of visual art. He's also a musician and an incredible, I'm going to call you a metaphysician as well as a physician. I know you as a metaphysician. Thank goodness, not as a physician. I haven't needed that. But welcome and thank you. I so enjoy these conversations. They're fantastic.
Oh, thank you very much. So do I. Thank you for having me back. It's great.
Yes. So where would you like to start tonight? Because last time we had an amazing conversation about looking at art and looking at what are the possibilities, really opening up our minds to innovation and creation and bringing together communities to really have this, what I call a courageous and conscious conversation around what the possibilities are for healthcare.
Oh, absolutely. I love that. I mean, I do believe the conversations that we are having is, focusing on consciousness and consciousness as it pertains to our ability to appreciate our interconnectedness, and not just to each other or to the planet, but ultimately even to ourselves, and how can we deepen that sense of connection. So what I'd like to do is maybe just share with everybody that this is a bit of a program that we have a little routine. And essentially, I'm going to show Helen a piece of art, just like in radiology rounds. I'm going to school. I'm going to show Helen an image, and I'll ask Helen to share with me her thoughts, her impressions, and perhaps how does it make her feel, and what would be a working title for this piece of art or this particular image. And I'll share with you my thoughts, and then we can open it up to the online audience. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Great.
So
Also, yes, I will just say for those of you on Facebook Live, we do have people monitoring your questions, and we'll get your questions as well as those of you on Zoom or your comments. All right, so let's have a look at the piece of art.
Okay, so I'll just share with you. This is my screen here. And welcome to Radical Art. Again, this is a radiologist's approach to explain energy for healthy minds and thriving communities. And we are really looking at, my screen doesn't seem to, my image won't, there we go. So can you see that, Helen?
No.
Medicinal model? No.
Oh, no, it just actually disappeared. Do you want to try bringing it up again?
I'll try. Give me 1 sec here.
Hmm.
Technology, despite using it every day, I find it is always a little bit. Okay, let's try this again. I'm going to just play it. Okay.
There you go.
Wonderful. So for those who are just joining in, basically over the last few weeks, we've been having a lot of conversations about energy from both a Western perspective, but also from an Eastern spiritual perspective. And we're using a piece of art called a medicinal mandala to help explain this very broad spectrum. And as a radiologist, I want to help you understand energy from a very scientific, very physics-based perspective. And at the same time, through experiences of traveling to India and studying with different spiritual communities after open heart surgery, I want to share with you some of the spiritual perspectives from the East. And as you can see from the mandala, the centerpiece that Einstein is staring at is called a vector equilibrium. And at the same time, His Holiness the Dalai Lama is staring on a mandala. These two images represents the West and the Eastern perspectives. And you can see there's a connection. They flow into each other. And it's this very particular frequency that we've been discussing about helping people tune in to an understanding of energy that can ultimately help them reframe who they are and what they are, individuals, but also as a collective. And in the medical journals, we call this psychophysiology, studying how emotions and thoughts affect your physiology, your biology, and your overall health. There's lots of labels that we can call this, but ultimately it's really about learning to recognize these patterns and appreciating how we can experience this energy that's available to all of us.
What I appreciate about this is the integration of the Western science and the Eastern philosophy, spirituality, energy, whatever you want to call it. And I think now more than ever, given what we have gone through in the last little while with this COVID-19 pandemic, there's an awakening that there has to be something more than what we've just been living with, that we need to tap into something that is much greater within ourselves to understand that we are all connected, we're all in this together, and that there are possibilities and opportunities for healing. And I don't necessarily mean curing, and I want to be really clear about that. Healing, this revealing of our own energy system that is connected to an energy system that's much greater than what we are.
Absolutely, I agree 100%. And really, this is a revolution in how we begin to understand the nature of reality. And I can say that as a radiologist, when we can non-invasively dissect the human body, slice people up like a loaf of bread without a scalpel blade, all because of energy. And it's appreciating that that will allow us to really enter a new era of consciousness and interconnectedness.
So it took a pandemic.
Yeah. No.
Really, it shouldn't have to take a pandemic to get to that kind of understanding. But it is what it is right now.
Well, and you know what? And in healthcare, I think a lot of my colleagues would agree that, when it comes to patient care, it's usually in a time of crisis in their own health and their own sense of mortality, that's when, people will make a decision to change their life's trajectory and really start implementing life changes and improve, their overall state of health. And it typically takes, a crisis or a scare to be able to prompt that change, unfortunately. But, we're here. So.
Yep.
So with that being said, Helen, this art, the theme of today's conversation is all about the state of health of our healthcare practitioners and our healthcare model, particularly in this now moment of the pandemic and health crisis. So I'll let you.
Wow. Okay. Well, there's an awful lot of chaos going on. Interesting, in the cranium, there's a lot of explosion and a lot of shift and change. But what I find so interesting is the 50% at the speaking point, and I wonder how much we really hear, really listen to what people are saying. It's like listening to the subtext, right? Because I think we miss, in the chaos of life, we miss clues, we miss cues. We aren't connected to the emotion. We try to just figure out what's happening intellectually versus really understanding there's an emotional subtext to everything that we say. So that's, and you know, maybe we're only catching 50% of it. I kind of think maybe a little bit less. I think 50% is very generous.
Yeah.
And, you know, in the cranium area, there is, I like how there's a mandala, the spiral in the center, which is representing there's a shift, there's a change in the energy. And of course, our thoughts are energy, our emotions are energy.
Absolutely.
But there's something going down the toilet on the left-hand side here. And maybe what's going down the toilet is the old, archaic, or antiquated. Maybe it's not archaic, but it's antiquated or limited way of thinking. I don't know what MRT stands for. Is that a...
Well, it's a good find, but we'll talk about it eventually.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Definitely, you know, the person on the right, there's that receptivity, the receiving of light, of consciousness, entering into that person's being, that awareness of consciousness, that there's a light, there's a whole different way of living our life that is connected to that infinite source. And I love that the light is shining sort of out of the sort of center of the body. What else do I see here? Interesting, that person who's more connected to the light is speaking out, right? I see the mouth open. So what I would take that as is a reaching out, a speaking out to share. The person with their mouth closed, maybe that represents more of a closed system, possibly, or an inability to even hear what that person might be saying, that there's another way to release stress, to show up in life, to understand ourselves at a much deeper level. But here's what else is happening on another level. There is a transmission of consciousness at the top through that spiral, because I see that the heart energy is actually moving into the other person's consciousness, and they might not even be aware of it at this point. So I'm wondering if also the lower part of the face represents what I would call the relative, like what we experience as dense earth beings, and that the top, there's a higher level of consciousness and transmission going on from the light and sending that to the other person, and that also has an effect.
Mm-hmm.
So there's an absolute, like, a causation that's taking place through the energy of, well, we know what coherence is that
Mm-hmm.
integration of mind, body, heart, our intuitive
Mm-hmm.
self. And that we have that ability when we're in that place of integration. It's such a powerful place. We can have such a positive effect on somebody else, and they might not even know that that's happening on a relative level, but there is something else happening there.
Powerful.
It's interesting. The more I look at your pieces of art, it's why you go to an art gallery and stand and stare at a piece of art, because there's so much depth to it.
Oh, yes. Yep. Love it.
I still would like to know what MRT stands for. And I do like, there's that beam of light. There's that one beam of light on the left-hand side in the pink and the purple area. And so that's the transmission. That's the beam of light that lands from this other person being in a place of coherence or, high level of consciousness. Anything else you want to add to this?
Well, I tell you, and this is why I love, this is called visual thinking strategy. When we have conversations using art, University of Toronto, Harvard, these academic centers uses this technique to teach their students, to teach medical physicians how to be better communicators and more empathetic, more compassionate. And so what I find is fascinating is because I get so much when I hear you interpret this piece of art. There's a lot of what you're describing. I deem it wasn't even my realm of consciousness at the time, and it just even deepens my appreciation and perspective once I hear yours. So it's a beautiful thing. I just like to sit back and let's hear.
Well, I just noticed also the green heart energy in the center between the two of them. As I move back, and I can see this outline and shape of a heart with the tail dropping down. So
oh, that's nice. I love that. So there's a lot here. This is packed.
Yes, it is.
And and you really mentioned some beautiful things, and I'll touch upon them as I kind of go through. But I want to say, what this conversation, what I wanted to kind of highlight is the state of health of healthcare practitioners and our hospitals. And when we talk about the state of health, I believe this is also really making the case for why it is so profoundly important that we start talking about energy and really having mature conversations about this understanding of mind, body, and spiritual health. Appreciating that intersection between science and spirituality is something that we each need to really begin to understand and, more importantly, embody. So in the top right corner, as you mentioned, you describe this individual holding their heart, and there's light emanating from their heart center. This really represents this new chapter in healthcare. When we start looking at all of the research, and we've been talking about this for a few weeks now, but it's now clear that the amount of evidence-based research that's showcasing that mind, body, and spirit, the three tenets, these are imperative to be nurtured, and if we want to be healthy, if we want to be happy in life. And we can see in that image, there's an EKG, there's some tracings, there's heart rate variability tracings, and it really goes to show us that we have technology now. We have the scientific understanding to really watch how the body reacts to our emotions of love, appreciation, empathy for others. And we can also watch what happens when we're in fear, when we're angry or frustrated. and the ripple effects of our entire system of health. There's a huge difference when you're in a feeling of love and appreciation. The positive effects throughout your entire physiology, hormonally, immunologically, biochemistry, your neural network, it all responds to that positive energy. At the same time, any degree of stress, we know, in fact, that the number one cause of inflammation throughout the body, which is the primary killer, when we think about health and disease, the number one cause of inflammation is feeling stressed. So the mind and the body are so inherently connected. And that light that's emanating from that figure, is light that's found in all of us. It's just a matter of learning how to tune in. And once we each tune into our own light, we're actually also tuning into each other's light because we share the same light. And this is where science is showing us very clearly how connected we actually are. The sense of interconnectedness, or the science of connectedness, is paramount to our health. And this is evidence-based medicine that we're talking about right now. Now, the consequences of not understanding energy, they're dire. There's serious implications for not really appreciating energy. And this is where the 50% comes in. Because even before COVID hit the scene, the Canadian Medical Association Journal showed us that medical doctors commit suicide at 40 to 50% rates higher than the communities that we're serving. So we have, I think everybody would agree that there has been a mental health epidemic that's hitting all ages, particularly our youth. But imagine now going to the doctor and now knowing that the doctor has a higher probability of committing suicide than you do. And so we're now really creates, a serious conversation that we need to have, because the patient-practitioner relationship is shifting, is becoming, different. When we start to understand that, look, we know that meditation helps. We know that it calms the mind. It reduces cortisol. We know that it takes away inflammation in the body. Now, knowing it is one thing, but unless we actually experience these mental exercises, it actually doesn't do any good to us. And I'm just using meditation as one simple example, but what I'm also suggesting is that energy is flowing throughout the body. Once we start to learn about energy, we can then learn about how we can access that energy to empower ourselves with improved health and wellness. So physicians, we are in a moment in time where we need to really embody these practices. And I know that doctors are starting to get continuing medical education credits discussing, consciousness, discussing meditation, but we need to now take that a next step further and incorporate the integration of these practices in our lives. Now, what I'm talking about is that, just physicians, but I can assure you that when you start looking across the board of other healthcare practitioners, particularly those on the front line, the mental health toll on these individuals is, it really concerns me because it is just overwhelming. And we're starting to see now healthcare practitioners committing suicide because of the degree of stress. So by not truly understanding and appreciating mind, body, spirit as the key tenets of health, how can we, really focus on our own health? How can we improve, self-care in order to improve patient care or the care of or caring for our communities? And at the same time, by not understanding energy, it also has very dire consequences on our healthcare model, on the design of our model of care. And what I mean by that is, when I was a chief of the department, very quickly I got to learn how the system was designed. And I was attending conferences that looked at how the healthcare model functioned and how to improve it. And everything was based on an industrialized model. We were discussing how Toyota created lean quality management protocols to improve the efficiency of their production line. And how can we apply that to medicine? How can we apply that to our hospitals? And I realized very quickly that, this is so far from what, looking at what research is telling us how to be healthy and what we need to do in order to cultivate health. And everything in medicine is very siloed. And so hence, when you look at this image, all of the different colors that are splattered against the wall, to me, that looks like, every color would be a different department in the hospital. Every department is siloed, and every department is literally fighting for every last dollar on the table. And there's just not enough to go around. So the healthcare model, by not appreciating this degree of interconnectedness, it is designed around, separateness. It's very fragmented. And that creates a lot of stress. It creates a lot of confusion. It certainly doesn't inspire collaboration. It's all about competition. So it creates a very difficult environment and a very unequal environment. And so when the healthcare system is not practicing based on what the evidence is showing us, we're starting to see that not only are the healthcare practitioners starting to get affected, but our communities ultimately will also be affected by this degree of, separateness. Now, the other aspect about having such a very fragmented model and that is just full of stress and anxiety is that even when you try to create positive change with all the best intentions, unfortunately, there'll always be ramifications and unintended consequences that will negatively impact your model of care because it's fragmented. And I'm going to give you an example of what's happening right now of this situation. Many people do not truly understand what the X-ray department does. And particularly, they don't understand what medical radiation technologists do. What is the role? And that is the MRT. MRTs are radiation technologists. Mm-hmm. Now, the MRTs, they study. They're not under the category of nursing, even though there's a lot of confusion. And in the industry of medicine, the MRTs are typically always kind of lumped under the category of nursing. And it's so far from that. And just to give you a bit of insight, the MRTs are trained. They study the laws of physics. They study not just how X-rays and photons and sound waves work, but they also have to understand the interaction with the physiology and our biology. They have to understand anatomy. So the radiation technologists are extremely highly trained how to acquire very specific, images. And these are state-of-the-art. This is state-of-the-art technology. It's not a matter of pushing a button, but these are folks who are very focused on the appropriate positioning, understanding how to manipulate all of the variables and the mathematics so that we get the optimal image so that we can provide an answer for a patient's physician and to improving patient care. Now, the role of the MRT is extremely physical. They're in close contact with every patient that they come across. They have to work with the patient. They have to position the patient. They have to help the patient mobilize if they're, if they're immobilized or decreased range of motion. And a very big thing is that, being on the front line of healthcare, you really need a really big heart. And we see that, throughout, healthcare. But in radiology, a lot of times we have patients who are very scared. They don't even know why they're coming over for a test, which adds to their anxiety. And the radiation technologist, even by just, having a smile, finding that compassion, that empathy in itself has a profound effect, even above and beyond the x-rays and the CAT scans and everything else that they're doing. Now, why I'm bringing this up is because the last few days, and I think last week, Premier Doug Ford just implemented a pandemic pay program. And the pay program was to help first frontline responders to have a bit of an increase for their hard work, their dedication during this particular time, and the fact that they're putting themselves at risk. Now, nurses and maintenance staff, cooking staff, a number of staff have been included in this program, but unfortunately, the medical radiation technologists have not been included. They've been excluded from this program. And, in my mind, as a radiologist, when I look at, why Doug Ford has implemented this program, when I read articles from the World Economic Forum, which has identified MRTs as being in the top 3 departments that have the highest degree of exposure and risk to the COVID virus, how can this segment be excluded from a pandemic, from the pandemic pay program? And I truly believe this is not, in spite. I don't think there's a malicious, cause for that. I think it's purely because the system is so complex, it's so fragmented, and ultimately people just don't have a real understanding of what we do in radiology, what we do in X-ray, how do we use energy. And so, I think that here's a perfect example of when a lack of understanding, a lack of knowledge can really have a profound, implication to our model of care, because I've been speaking with the technologists and they feel very demoralized. They feel very unacknowledged, despite their absolute, their fearless commitment. They're absolutely committed to their patients and their communities. And I really believe, and they're heroes just like many of the others on our front lines. And I know that MRTs are not the only group that have been excluded. And I disagree with that. I think if we're going to, put a program like this, we need everybody to be involved and to be included in this type of a program, because ultimately it now creates further divide. It fragments care, and it really, affects the morale of your institution, which studies have shown has a profound effect on clinical outcomes. So the top left corner of seeing that, with MRT, and it looks like someone's getting a slap in the face. And I know that's how many of my colleagues feel, by not being included in this program. And the toilet, with this hand kind of rising from the toilet, this really symbolizes that the way that our healthcare model is designed, is really a consequence of how we look at the world in general. I mean, it takes its cues from an industrialized model of living, how we've created, how we designed this socioeconomic model centuries ago at a time when we thought we understood ourselves and each other. And now we're at a time where research is completely, completely changing that perspective of a you versus me to a you and me. It's a we. Mm-hmm. And we can't be healthy unless we really cultivate that sense of interconnection with each other. So that toilet, and it kind of represents, with this pyramid of cards coming out of the toilet, that represents this pyramid of, resource of 1% ruling, having 85% of global resource, while the rest of the 99%, fighting for limited resources. Well, that, even though it's on a global level, it really affects us on the local level. And here's one prime example, because our hospitals are taking the same cues as we do, looking at it from a global socioeconomic perspective. And these have consequences, even down to our local community members. So in general, this is kind of as a case to say, look, we need to start having mature conversations around energy because it has profound effects on the individual's health, the health of our communities, the health of our infrastructure like healthcare and education. And ultimately, when a hospital is so stressed on trying to find money just to keep the doors open, there is no room for innovation and to think about how we are so interconnected, and hence why we're not prepared for this pandemic. There was lots of warning signs. There's lots of people in the world that were telling us that this was inevitable. And there's really no reason why we weren't prepared for it, other than when you look at the system and you start to see, who's making decisions, why they're making the decisions, and, what are the constraints involved, it starts to make a lot of sense. So that's my piece.
That was a great piece, Mitch. And yeah. I think what you're describing is one system, the healthcare system, that is not the only system that is fragmented by any stretch. And that, when we can have a system that starts to really open up and experience the humanity within it, to really see the beingness of each person and the importance of collaboration, of communication, of inclusivity, and with the intention that this system, it becomes a system that rises up, not splinters into all different places, but becomes cohesive and starts to rise up humanity. And I think, that it's so needed in the healthcare system, and certainly that the sadness around the fact that there are so many suicide rates and amongst physicians or healthcare workers, and where are the cues being missed? Where is the understanding of the impact of stress on a system and on an individual that would take someone to the brink of that? Because to get to that place, it's a pretty desperate, lonely place, and a feeling of, there's nothing left. And, you think of healthcare workers, and they're there to serve. I mean, I don't think you go into healthcare, to not want to be of service on some level. And when you feel like you just can't do that anymore, and that there's no hope, right?
Absolutely. I mean, it's beautiful. I love how you just summed it up. I wish I could have summed it up in as many words as you did. It's a beautiful way. And, what really gets me is that my colleagues who are, run ragged throughout the day, typically don't have time for their lunch breaks, they don't have time for breaks. And it's just a constant degree of stress and constant push and pull throughout their day. They can still muster, a smile or an open heart for a patient. But at the same time, the number of colleagues that I can see over, within 5 years, how the system takes a slow and gradual toll of just constant stress. So physically and mentally, the toll on, my colleagues, unfortunately, I can just see, it just sucks the life out of them. And you can imagine, as you said, people who come into the field of medicine and in healthcare, it's because they have such a big heart and want to give. They just want to be in service to others and want to help. And why is it that our system of care is designed in such a way that it sucks the most important piece of humanity from our healthcare givers? So eventually, it's like robots, and we have burnout fatigue, we have compassion fatigue,
Compassion
burnout.
fatigue, yeah.
And I don't blame anybody. I mean, when I was a patient, I experienced it, but I recognize, because of the bigger picture, I realized that there wasn't enough staff. I realized there's not enough resources. But at the same time, now is a time we need to have conversations. We need change. And if we don't change, then this COVID, and I'll say it again. This COVID is just the warning shot. This is just the jab. And we've already had a few jabs between SARS and MERV, COVID. This is just setting us up. Things are getting more intense each and every time. So if we don't get our act in order, how many more chances are we going to have? What type of future do we expect to have living a very fragmented, chaotic, and stress-filled life?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, and we've had Ebola, and we've also, we still have the AIDS pandemic going on. It's not finished yet. So there's many, there's how many more can we take before there's a complete collapse or disintegration? And that's not going to be helpful for anybody, because we need our healthcare system. And so to be able to offer alternatives and open up the conversation. And I like what you said about a mature or an adult. I can't remember which word you used, but a mature or an adult conversation about energy and consciousness, because it can often come off as airy-fairy or ungrounded, and it's not. And I think we're at a time in humanity and our evolution where more and more people are willing to have that conversation, that the consciousness is changing, and we can open up to looking at something different that is more supportive, and where we're present, where we're truly present to people. Because I think there's a lot of cues that get missed when people are in distress, and we're just staying on the top, right? Instead of really understanding what is the emotion behind that, or we're scared to get to the emotional place, because emotions can be very scary for some people. They don't know how to handle it. There are a couple of questions here. One is can we go back to the speaker view if we're done with the arts? I don't know if you are or not, but
we can.
I said we would get there. And then also someone on Facebook is asking about, let me just move it over to here. Nope, that didn't work. Now I just lost the chat. Someone was asking about, was the atom at the top about getting back to basics in healthcare, which I'm not sure what getting back to basics is, because I think it's a long time since we've been there.
Well, that's a really interesting way of looking at it. Initially, I put the atom there because I knew I was going to talk about X-ray and the X-ray department. And here we are, a field of medicine that uses energy and X-rays and vibrations. But at the same time, the more that we understand energy from that very scientific, complex perspective, it also helps us understand that we have to get back to basics, because medicine at a certain point, was all about connecting. Doctors did home visits. There was a relationship between doctor and patient. Now, a family physician has less than 7 minutes per patient. Otherwise, that patient's visit is going to cost the office money. They'll lose money. So the whole system, has unfortunately become so industrialized, and it's a financially driven model and blah, blah, blah. But more we understand about science and energy, yes, I do believe the atom will help us get back to a very simplistic and more connected perspective, which is our roots.
Okay, so if I understand what you're saying, that the atom representing the intentional energy behind the basics of healthcare, of being present and connecting and supporting the physician, supporting the patient, or the healthcare worker supporting the patient. And that the more we understand there is that exchange of energy, and that our energy also has the ability to impact. Is that what you mean? Because I just want to be sure that I understand it. I am sure that the person who said this totally gets it, because he's a science guy. I'm not a science guy or gal.
Well, yes, you're absolutely right. The atom, which is really an image just to represent the laws of physics and what we're now understanding about the laws of physics, we are so connected. We're interconnected. We're able to transmit energy from one heart to the next. My heart rhythms can affect your rhythms. And in fact, you know this, our rhythms can synchronize when we're in love and compassion with each other. We can watch this. We can all our viewers, we can now synchronize together.
Yes. And we can scientifically prove that. Yes.
Absolutely. We watch this. I mean, so there's so many facets to understanding energy. When we understand this energy, it really helps us understand our interconnectedness. It empowers us with knowledge that will allow us to become more proactive in our health. And at the same time, that connection that exists really is stating what the old model of care always knew, that there has to be this relationship between the patient and the practitioner. There has to be a deep connection that has to be cultivated. And research shows the biopsychosocial model of care, or the BPS, mind, body, spirit, whatever you want to label it as, it tells us very clearly, as a patient, your prognosis will be correlated to how connected you feel to the person providing you with care and the organization providing it. So if you don't trust the individual, if you don't like their attitude, or you feel that they rub you the wrong way, that will have a profound effect on your care. And it's really redefining who is a practitioner of health. What's the definition of a practitioner of health when we start looking at it from a much more broad perspective?
How would you define a practitioner of health?
Me personally, anybody that helps the community grow, either personally or collectively. So from that perspective, any educator who's providing education so that they better understand themselves, so it empowers them one step closer to improve their health, that's a practitioner. Somebody who knows just how to be present for somebody, to know how to listen and be empathetic, to have an open heart for somebody, that's a practitioner of health. I even see a musician. If a musician is using their art and their passion to send a message of love, or try to bring people together for community, a sense of community, that's a practitioner. So anybody that really helps nurture the mind, the body, or the spirit of feeling connected, I see them as practitioners. And this is going to radically, healthcare is going to go through such a transformation over the next, decade or two. And, who we understand as being a practitioner is radically changing.
What I appreciate about that is that it levels the playing field. It doesn't dismiss, and I think that's very important, it doesn't dismiss or diminish anybody's expertise in their field, and to really be able to recognize and honor what that person has studied, what their credentials are. At the same time, it also it may open up practitioners or healthcare professionals that have only seen themselves as, I have this body of knowledge and my job is to go in and only focus on that, which is where, the isolation of, this is the only thing I look at in my practice, will now expand into, okay, wait a minute, I've got a human being. I've got a whole person sitting in front of me, and who are they? And then also it raises up the people that are able to really hold space to have other modalities or other ways of being compassionate, being able to see or transmit energy, that's got some credibility, right? And that we're all in this together. And if we don't support one another, that's where I went to the 50% of really, like, are we really understanding, listening to, and hearing the gifts that people have to offer? And being able to take that in and receive it, and also understanding at all times what may work for one person may not work for another person, because it's such an individual process. But it then gives the power back to the person to go, this is what works for me, and maybe this doesn't, or maybe I'll try it on and see. And so it just creates more openness.
Yeah, absolutely. You touched on so many, really important points. And ultimately, a role of healthcare and the traditional healthcare practitioner, we really need to get better at providing information, because informed consent, and like you said, we really need a patient-centered model. We use this as a term in medicine, but we don't embody it. And there's lots of ways of healing. Energy medicine is at its infancy, and that's just one big category of looking at how to work with the energies of your system. And yes, it works for some, it doesn't work for others. And so much of it depends on the attitude and perception of the patient, of the practitioner, of the disease state. I mean, there's so many factors involved. The one thing that I can say with absolute certainty, though, is that we have gone down this rabbit hole of big pharma for so long that it has taken over medicine. And we're practicing, I'm not suggesting drugs are bad, but I am suggesting that we have given away our power, and we have lost sight of our inherent capacity. And studies now show that when a drug company is creating drugs and doing their research, up to 70% of the control group, up to 70% of people in these trials will actually have a clinical outcome just by taking a placebo pill, because they think that they're taking the pill. And so we really understand now that the placebo effect is really a meat of medicine that we need to tune into. And again, this is just going to we're heading into a paradigm shift in how we practice and how we think about medicine.
Which is exciting, that I find that exciting. A big pharma is not going to go away. It's not
Yeah.
there. It's here, but to know that for every individual, they have choice, and that there's some really great things about pharmaceuticals that have helped millions of people.
Mm-hmm.
It's then deciding, but allowing that person to decide. And I think, it's that informed consent. And one of the things, I love what you say about the placebo, because for me, and in some of the work that I do, it's incredible how quickly people will open up to do their own healing work when they feel safe, when they are seen, they feel secure, and they feel soothed. They feel soothed by the person, that there's this empathetic connection, and it's a game changer.
Mm-hmm.
But this
Absolutely.
is also something for healthcare professionals that they also need to learn to do for themselves.
100%.
Because,
Yes.
and I think that's also that education part of, this is where we can all fill up our own tanks so that we're overflowing, and we can give what's overflowing, but not depleting
Yeah.
ourselves.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I mean, obviously the statistics are clear that physicians, they really need this information. They need to start practicing
Mm,
this for their own. And if they want to show up to be the best version for their patients, the best versions of themselves, well, I mean, there's no argument here. I mean,
yeah.
we need to be incorporating this as an integral part of the healthcare model, not an add-on. We're not talking about just slapping it on and trying to get things done. I've been in the system and I can see it doesn't work. If you don't have time to eat your lunch, certainly there's no time to start implementing, a mental health program that helps restore your practitioners
Mm,
during the run of a chaotic day. It doesn't fly. You're still thinking about the industry. You're still thinking about Toyota, lean quality management.
right.
And so this is why we need to just, we need new innovative ways to redesign our model.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of good
Okay.
work to do.
Yes.
A lot of
Lots
good
of
work.
conversation.
There are a couple of comments that Lena says. I think she's on Facebook. Practitioners of health come in many forms, and being of service, helping, guiding others to improve their situation and conditions. And we're all in this together. And then she also says energy medicine, effective and dependent on receptivity of the individual. Yes, and it is. And I mean, I think that's when somebody feels safe and they feel that soothing energy and they feel secure, they're open and receptive. But if you're trying to slam something at them, people are just going to put up their defenses.
Hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. And Tom says, thank you so much for an excellent presentation. Thanks to both of you so much.
Thanks, Tom.
Yeah. Yeah.
Before we go, I just want to mention to everybody that if you're watching this, particularly if you're watching this on a replay, I hope that that you hear kind of what I'm saying with respect to the medical radiation technologists. I think this is a blatant oversight, and I urge you to share this video and provide comments and just share it with your family, your friends, your social network, because I think it's very important that we raise awareness for the MRTs and for the other and all the other staff that have been excluded from this pay program. I really hope we can raise awareness so that if it's an oversight, that's fine. I understand there's a lot of confusion and just a lot of not knowing. But once we know and nothing changes, well, then that oversight just becomes an injustice. And that, enough is enough. And particularly in this moment in time, we need integrity. If we need anything, we just need integrity to move us forward in a new direction.
Right. And integrity is wholeness. So that includes the wholeness of the system. That includes everyone. Is there any petition or form being sent
There
around at
is,
this point?
yeah, on
Mm-hmm.
change.org, there is. And you know
Oh,
what I
okay,
will
great.
do is I will get the link
Mm-hmm.
for that. And I will put it as a comment to this video on Facebook.
Mm-hmm. Great.
Um,
Thank you. Also, I think, the name frontline workers represents people who are just seen in the front. And yet, I know from what I do, it's not just the people who are seen in the front, it's everybody working behind the scenes in support and in contribution to what that intention is. So, and of course, this intention is getting people well from COVID. So,
I agree.
maybe the name
Absolutely.
needs to change
Yeah. No,
to
I agree.
The all line workers or something. I know somebody else could come up with a creative name that works much better than I could. But yeah, and we forget that. I think as human beings, we forget that it's not just the people you see in front. It's what's holding up the entire system.
Yeah, absolutely. I always describe medicine as like the healthcare model is like a chain link, and the chain is only as strong as that weakest link. And everybody, I mean, we all have a role to play, and if you know, just a smile is as much medicine, you know, as any drug. And who are we to say, you know, otherwise, except for that person?
Well, and I mean, it doesn't matter. They're both equally important, and that is the integration. So that is the wholeness of the system and the integrity.
We just need a lot. We just need a lot of heart. We need
a lot of heart, a lot of consciousness. And that's what these conversations are for, right? Is to bring that awareness and have those conversations with other people. And I think we're talking about bringing on some other people for the next one, so that, you know, maybe we have a couple of other people.
For sure. Absolutely.
In the conversation and experiencing other perceptions and other ideas. You know, there's so many possibilities for healing and collaboration. And I love what you say, creating conscious communities. Because it's also when we're in community that we can connect with others, but also we can support the weakest link and raise them up. It's not about cutting them loose. And absolutely. I think that's an important aspect as we move forward and through this pandemic, that we're supporting everyone.
Oh, yeah. 100%. I love that. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for the conversation, and thank you for the comments online, and thank you to Ellen and Lena for moderating those comments. I appreciate that, and I will get this up on YouTube and get the link out as well, so that people can rewatch this, or you can rewatch it on Facebook Live as well.
Helen, before we cut out, can I just show this is my gratitude card this week. So my gratitude card this week is dedicated to the medical radiation technologists, because I know how dedicated they are and how fiercely committed that the MRTs are to patients and to communities. And I know that not being included in this program by the government has been a real blow to morale. So I just wanted to acknowledge my fellow imagers. And for those who this is really a way to spread positive gratitude and compassion. And we have this on our Facebook page. And, you know, by coloring these designs, it's good for the brain. It actually calms people. And at the same time, for those who have kids, it's a nice way to occupy your children. And again, it shifts brainwaves into a very therapeutic frequency. So this is a way that you can use energy around the kitchen table and get a little bit of a health benefit from it all.
That's great. And that is available on NextGen Health Facebook page, correct? The link?
Yes. And yes, you can print it off and you'll see the instructions. We just asked you to color it, share your thoughts of love for anyone that's putting their life, in harm's way for the community, for essential services, or they're on the front line, and then tag them. Tag NextGen Health as well, and we will repost. And we just asked you to use hashtag Love is Infectious too. Yes,
which is fabulous. I love that. Great. Thank you, Mitch. And
thank you.
Mitch's new website, nextgenhealth.solutions. Fabulous website. So
thank you.
Thank you so much. All
right.
Thank
you very much.
We will talk soon. Bye, everyone.